Hey guys, welcome to Quinian's Budget Crafts. Got something a little bit different for you today. I had to pickle 10 dozen eggs, and so now you've got to suffer with me. I do want to point out that the FDA and the CDC warn against pickling eggs because of a risk of botulism, and they're not wrong, but a lot of foodborne illness is because of improper handling, so maybe don't be dirty and you'll be fine. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get an extremely bad camera angle on your jars. You'll seriously wash all your jars and lids with soap and water. Get your canning pot water boiling and add a little bit of white vinegar to that to help prevent any clouding on the outside of the jars. And same thing with a smaller pot for your lids. Then go ahead and take your jars and stick them in the boiling hot water. Be very careful here, put them in slowly and at an angle so that they can fill without the water shooting up in the air and spraying you with hot boiling vinegar water, because that's no fun. While those are back there sterilizing, we need to cut up some veggies. Got a couple recipes for you. This first one calls for an entire clove of garlic. You can use them whole or chop them up. If you just want to chop them quickly, you can just kind of go across and sort of mince them. Just rough chop is fine. Some jalapenos. How many you use depends on how much kick you want this to have. Don't worry about coring them and seeding them and all that stuff. Just chop them up. Gonna need some bell pepper. You can use whatever kind of bell pepper you like. I like these bags of bell peppers because the little ones are kind of sweet actually, and they look nice in the jar to have several different colors. And an onion. Just cut it in half and cut those halves into little rings. Everything in this recipe is pretty rough. Throw all of that into a pot. Then add in a decent handful of mixed peppercorns, probably a quarter cup or so. Bit of fine ground black pepper. Again, this is really to taste. And then use pickling salt or kosher salt. Do not use table salt. These two types of salts don't have anti-caking agents in them, which will really mess with your canning. The only difference between the two is the kosher salt tends to be like a coarse ground, whereas the pickling salt is the fine stuff you're used to, just without the junk in it. This one I actually do measure. I want 2 tablespoons for this recipe. You could use a little more if you want them saltier, but definitely do not use less. The salt is important with canning. And now we need water and vinegar. I'm using bottled water here because I don't really trust the tap water. And you want to do 50-50. These bottles are about 2 cups. So I'll put in 2 of those for 4 cups, and then 4 cups of apple cider vinegar. Decided that wasn't actually quite enough liquid, so I went ahead and did 2 more cups of each. So 6 cups total of each. Go ahead and throw that on the stove and let it cook down for about a half hour or so. While that's going, we can go ahead and prep the second recipe. For this one, I am using 4 bottles of malt vinegar. Chop up some peppers of your choice. I like these little serrano peppers. And then for the spices, we're going to add in a couple tablespoons of salt, fairly decent handful of whole cloves, same thing with some black peppercorns, few cinnamon sticks busted up, and about a tablespoon or so of allspice. Might sound weird because of how much spicy stuff is in here, but this smells like Christmas. Kind of tastes like it too. Alright, so you're also going to need eggs, a ton of eggs. If you got your own chickens, use those, otherwise try and shop local. And I'm going to do 1 whole tray of this box at a time. That is 2.5 dozen. If you don't have a pot that big, you can definitely do it in smaller shifts, but I do, so I'm going to. In a pot this big, you may not get a rolling boil, at least not right away. You can assist that by putting the lid on there. And set your timer for, I did 15 minutes. That was kind of a mistake. They overcooked a little bit, so maybe go with about 10 to 12, depending on your altitude and all that stuff. Once they're done, you can get a bowl of ice water, and then shock these things by scooping them out of the boiling and tossing them right into the ice water. Instead of dumping the boiling and pouring water over it, I'm doing this way because I want to preserve that hot water so I can use it again for the next batch, and not have to wait 30 minutes for it to boil. Once you're all done with that, you get the super fun task of peeling 10 dozen eggs. You will inevitably mess up some of them. They'll have big holes and chunks missing. And if you're lucky enough to have a Mrs. Quinn, you can have her make deviled eggs out of those for you. Seriously though, if it's got a couple little blemishes or whatever, that's fine, but don't use any where the yolk is actually exposed because that will leak into the liquid and it just looks terrible. So for actually canning these, or jarring them, however you want to word it, for the first batch, you just go ahead and spoon a little bit of veggies in there, throw a couple eggs in there, put some more veggies on top, put a couple more eggs, and then fill the whole thing up with the liquid. As for the headspace on these jars, you can use a headspace gauge, but right about to the threads, maybe a little bit past, is pretty much where you want to go. Go ahead and wipe the rim with something like a clean paper towel. Notice I set that one down. I'm not going to use that one again because I set it on the counter. Pull your lids from the boiling water that they're in, the little magnet thingy, and then secure a ring on it just finger tight. For that second recipe, we're going to take this liquid with all the stuff in it and strain it out. We don't want any of those solids. This one's a lot simpler. All you really got to do is just toss eggs in the jar and then just pour your liquid right over it. It is important to note that absolutely everything you're working with here should be kept very hot. The jar should be kept in the boiling water until you're ready to use them. Same for the lids. Once you're all ready to go, you can put them in the pot to boil, put the lid on, and set the timer for 30 minutes. Once the timer goes off, pull them all out and set them on a wire rack. And do not touch them until they all pop. You'll hear a very distinctive pop noise. Can't miss it. Once the lids have popped, you can go through and screw those rings on nice and tight at this point. Or you could actually take the ring off and put one of the fancy little cloth thingies and then screw the ring on top. You know how Grandma does jars of jelly. Anyway, the lid portion is actually sealed to the jar very well now. The ring is just to make sure it doesn't ever pop off. You should leave these sit for at least 2 weeks before you eat them to give them a chance to actually pickle and absorb all the flavors and stuff. They should have a firm, snappy, but not quite rubbery texture. And as far as storage goes, of course the food ABC alphabet guys suggest you store them in the fridge because they're eggs. I never have unless the jar didn't actually seal. And I'm still alive, so, to each their own, I guess. Although I will say, if you're not going to store them in the fridge, you definitely want to store them somewhere cool and out of direct sunlight, because warm, liquid, and bright sunlight is a guaranteed way to grow cruddies. You don't want that. I actually do have several different things that I know how to cook that are pretty cool and maybe something you haven't seen before. If you guys do want more cooking videos, let me know and I will actually bust out the better camera. I know that the lighting and the camera itself and the angles and everything on this one are terrible. But if you wanted to see more interesting kind of different things to cook that most people don't talk about, let me know, and I'll see about getting that done. Of course, as always, thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.